Good morning, everybody. Can you on the back row hear me okay? Great, that's good. I presume all of you know that my name is John Olsen, but in case you don't, I'm John Olsen. I'm a professor here in the School of Anthropology. I want to welcome you to this celebration of Bill Longacre's life this morning. First, I'd like to take a moment to thank several people who have been responsible for making sure that this all has happened according to the way we wanted to. First of all, Diane Austin, who is the director of the School of Anthropology, we owe a huge debt of thanks to for her support. The staff of the School of Anthropology, in particular Catherine Lehman, who is just recently left the room, so she's not here to enjoy our thanks, really did everything basically to make sure that this functioned. We're also extremely indebted to Dr. Dana Osborne here with the mic in her ear, as well as her student assistants, for producing what is emerging as basically an hour-long documentary description of Bill Longacre, his life and his career, based on interviews that they started last year with Bill and have included StoryCorps-like snippets of feedback from the likes of Raymond Thompson and others about Bill Longacre. We'll be showing you a 3-minute trailer of the video a bit later this morning just to whet your appetites. I think the final version will be ready within the next couple of weeks that you'll be able to access. A couple of points for your attention. One of our speakers in the program, Dr. Stephen Acabado from UCLA, is unable to be with us today. He had a last-minute family medical emergency that forced him to cancel his trip over. So we've reorganized the schedule just a little bit, but the other speakers are here with us. Secondly, I would like to give a shout out to the University of Arizona Press and its director, Dr. Allison Carter, who generously donated 8 hardcover copies of the famous 2007 book edited by Graves, Skibo, and Miriam Stark, Archaeological Anthropology Perspectives on Method and Theory. I say donated because they gave us 8 copies of the book to pass on to you. So how do we determine among you who is the most worthy? It's actually quite straightforward. If you look at the back of your program, you will see that there is an opportunity to make a donation to the Longacre Graduate Scholarship. And at the end of 30 days from today, the 8 people who've made the largest contribution to that source will receive a copy of those books. Now, originally, I had intended to get Dr. Graves and Dr. Skibo to sign copies.
And reduce the value.
But therein reducing the value. But in the category of best laid plans, the University of Arizona Press distributes all of its books out of a suburb of Chicago, it turns out. And in the process of FedExing me 8 copies of the book, they sent 1. And so I have that 1 copy out there. But in any case, please enter the competition to receive one of those 8 copies. It's now my pleasure to introduce actually one of the 3 editors of that volume, Dr. Michael W. Graves, who is our compere this morning. Michael received his PhD in 1981 under Bill Longacre's supervision on ethnoarchaeology of Kalinga ceramic designs. Mike is currently professor of anthropology at the University of New Mexico, having previously served for many years on the faculty and the administration of the University of Hawaii at Manoa. His research focuses on the development of agriculture and other modes of subsistence in Hawaii, and he also dabbles in archaeological theory and practice as well, as I'm sure all of you are aware. So allow me now to turn the floor over to Mike.
Thank you all, and let me know if you are having trouble hearing me in the back of the room. We're here today to recognize and honor the life of William A. Longacre, former Fred Riker Distinguished Professor of Anthropology, and his contribution as faculty member at U of A for more than 40 years, where he spent virtually his entire professional career. He was born December 16th, 1937, on Beethoven's birthday. He died 1 month short of his 78th birthday in November of 2015. The plan here today is simple, to pay honor, homage to this man, who many of us know as friend or colleague, or as a scientist, or as a confidant, or as a mentor, a humorist, administrator, and a maker of some of the worst puns ever presented in the world. William Longacre, as he preferred to be known to us, Uncle Willie, he displayed various personal characteristics. He was generous and kind. He was devoted to the university and to anthropology. Though accomplished academically, Uncle Willie showed us time and again just how this was just one aspect of life. For Uncle Willie to live the good life was to be demonstrated in action and achieved through a shared belief. So our plan today is simple, and we have several invited guests to prepare remarks in hopes that they'll illustrate various aspects of the breadth and depth and the relationships and causes that Bill sustained over time here at the university. So we have represented here today Michael Schiffer, Raymond Thompson, James Skibo, myself, and I will also read the remarks of Boy Stephen Acabado as well. At the end of the presentations, we will have an open mic as well. So folks who would like to say a few words are welcome to come forward and speak to Bill's career and history as well. And I have a few remarks, including one from my colleague Miriam Stark, who sent me several typed pages of things that. Before we begin with the statements, I want to provide at least a brief acknowledgement of the various individuals who were here in November of 2015 when Bill entered the hospital. It includes John Olsen, a long family friend and trusted colleague, Roberto, Bill's handyman, who really became his caregiver, particularly in the last year of his life. Mike Onishi, his assistant from the Philippines, who traveled to the U.S. regularly with Bill to provide physical assistance. Gloria Fenner, his long-time friend and confidant. And also the staff, particularly the critical care nurses at St. Mary's Hospital here in Tucson, without whom I would have been unable to provide the kind of care or assistance or advice on the end-of-life care for Bill that he received. So all of these individuals came together to make this process, although sorrowful and difficult, but one that I think was done really as successfully as can be imaginable under the circumstances. So I'm going to give thanks and express my gratitude to all of you. So let's begin with the speakers. I had introductory remarks I was going to make about each speaker, but I think they really speak for themselves. So first up, Michael Schiffer.
Thanks, Mike. Can you all hear me? Okay. I'm going to mostly read a personal statement about my interactions with Uncle Willie over the decades, and I don't do spontaneous all that well, so bear with me. So, as an undergrad at UCLA, I learned about William Longacre's pioneering work at Carter Ranch, Pueblo, which helped to launch processual archaeology, as most of you know. And so, as an aspiring processualist, I'd hoped one day to meet Professor Longacre, and that time came in the summer of 1968 when I was a student at Paul Martin's field station in Vernon, Arizona. And at that time, Professor Longacre was director of the University of Arizona Field School. And it was the custom then for Grasshopper and Vernon to meet on the volleyball court every summer and play a very spirited game for a trophy, which was an old mono, which went back and forth. And if anybody knows the whereabouts of that, please see me afterwards. I was surprised looking at Professor Longacre that he was indistinguishable in his youthful appearance from the rest of the Grasshopper students. And I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. So young and so famous already. And I thought, that would be fun to follow in his footsteps, right? So as a grad student at Arizona, I took my first course from him, North American Archaeology. And he encouraged us to be creative in our semester projects, to ask new questions and analyze data in new ways. And after the semester ended, I revised the theoretical section of my term paper and asked him, and by then I felt comfortable calling him Uncle Willie. So I asked Uncle Willie if he would give me feedback on this draft paper. And the draft was harshly critical of both traditional and processual archaeologists for their inadequate treatment of formation processes. And this concerned Uncle Willie. When I met with him in his office, he pointed out, of course, several typos in the manuscript. And he reminded me that data is a plural word. And then he gently advised me that you catch more flies with honey than with vinegar. He did see some promise in the paper and urged me to submit it to a journal. And I toned down the criticism somewhat. And after many revisions and insightful comments from John M. Fritz, that paper became Archaeological Context and Systemic Context, which a few people may still remember. Now, had I followed Longacre's advice and dished out more honey than vinegar, perhaps I would have cultivated fewer enemies in the discipline. Well, in the fall of 1970, before anyone else in my entering class of graduate students, I took the dreaded 4 field exams. And I was also the first to fail. So I was a little bit discouraged and thinking about leaving Arizona, so I sought out Uncle Willie's advice. And he told me to stay at Arizona and, damn it, pass the exam next time. And so I did. And this was one of many times that in his kindly and dispassionate way, he steered me in the right direction. God knows if I'd ended up somewhere like Michigan. The history of archaeology was one of Uncle Willie's long-standing passions. And in the spring of 1972, I think it was 1972, Jeff, you were in that class, you might remember, I took his seminar in the history of Southwestern archaeology. And his enthusiasm for historical research was contagious. And I'd never done any historical research before, but I found it pretty exciting. And as some of you know, I caught the history bug during that semester, and it continues to bite me in sensitive places. In 1973, when Uncle Willie was at Stanford, I sent him a draft of my dissertation on formation processes at the joint site. I always chuckle when I see that name. But he provided me with no comments on the dissertation. Well, he wasn't on the committee, but I thought he would read it. But apparently he hadn't. Well, after defending my dissertation, I took a job with the Arkansas Archaeological Survey, which was helped along by Professor Thompson, who had gone to graduate school at Harvard with Charles McGimsey, the survey's director. And there really was an old boys network back then, and boy, did I benefit from it. And I say that unapologetically, sorry. Well, one day while I was immersed in the prehistory of Arkansas's Cache River Basin, I got a call from an editor at Academic Press. Uncle Willie had suggested to him that my dissertation would make a good book for their archaeology series. I guess he had read it after all, and after revising it, the dissertation became behavioral archaeology, which helped to establish my reputation for better and for worse. I should also mention that my return to Arizona as a faculty member was aided by Uncle Willie's strong support. I'm not sure why he was so impressed with me in those early years, but I was honored to be in his good graces, and that really meant a lot to me. In my studies of formation processes, I had reluctantly concluded that the innovative ceramic analyses done by Uncle Willie and James N. Hill were faulty because they ignored patterns of cultural deposition. I demonstrated these defects after reanalyzing Hill's ceramic data from Broken Cave Pueblo. When I told Uncle Willie about this work, he asked me why I didn't use his site, Carter Ranch Pueblo. Well, I was floored by the question and mumbled something about already having Hill's data in a convenient form. But clearly, I hadn't wanted to show with Uncle Willie's own data that his classic work was deeply flawed. I shouldn't have worried, though. Uncle Willie did not have a large ego. He embraced honest criticism and learned from it rather than reacting to it emotionally, as some of us did. From that point on, Uncle Willie was a strong advocate for the study of formation processes and a proponent of behavioral archaeology. In later years, he supported the cross-fertilization of ethnoarchaeology and experimental archaeology. The result was James M. Skibo's masterful dissertation on pottery function, which he has paid me to cite here, which as a book is now in its second edition and is garnering all sorts of critical acclaim in popular magazines or someplace. I was going to be serious. During his decades, but Uncle Willie probably wouldn't have liked that, no. During his decades of ethnoarchaeology among the Kalinga, Uncle Willie and I served together on his students' dissertation committees. We both enjoyed these stimulating collaborations, and I felt privileged to be an honorary participant in the project that was taking ethnoarchaeology in so many important directions. Its wide-ranging research questions, some of them pursued over 3 decades, elevated ethnoarchaeology from drive-by observations, such as those reported by Ian Hodder, into a real behavioral science. Along the way, he nurtured the careers of several generations of students. Even after retirement, Uncle Willie continued to work with graduate students, some of whom analyzed Kalinga data for journal articles. Uncle Willie was born on December 16th, which was also Beethoven's birthday. For many years, he hosted at his home an annual Beethoven's birthday party, inviting friends, colleagues, and students. One year, he decided not to hold the party and instead went to dinner with friends who had prepared an after-dinner surprise. When the dinner party returned to his home and opened the door, Beethoven's Ninth Symphony began blasting from the speakers while all of us emerged from the shadows and shouted, "Surprise!" A sloshed Uncle Willie looked like a deer caught in headlights, and he always insisted that it was a complete surprise. Who knows, right? Uncle Willie was a terrific colleague in every respect. If you ever served with him on a committee or anything like that, you know he was highly responsible and respected by everybody. Well, he was such a good colleague that he reluctantly agreed to be drafted as department head. He really didn't want the job, and he was not ideally suited to this role. Let's be honest about that. In crossing to the dark side, honorable scholars too often become facile liars, shed their academic values, and feather their own nests. Not so Uncle Willie. He retained his honesty, upheld high academic values, and fiercely championed the interests of colleagues and the department above all else. Not surprisingly, the dean and Uncle Willie did not enjoy the most fruitful relationship. He was delighted to step down from the headship when the department, by unanimous vote, offered him the Fred A. Rieker Chair. And at that time, you couldn't be both department head and Rieker Distinguished Professor. I can't help but mention 2 of Uncle Willie's most distinctive personal traits. First was his unflagging optimism. Surely he must have seen the world through rose-colored contact lenses. Second, he could dispense bad puns without warning in any social context. And really, it takes a special talent to cause everybody else in a room to groan loudly. Well, Uncle Willie did not supervise my field work or serve on my dissertation committee. Even so, he was a mentor, a promoter of my work, an esteemed colleague, and above all, a dear friend. He was also a kind, generous, and modest man, a gentleman, and also a true mensch. The School of Anthropology has lost one of the people who established its stellar reputation in modern archaeology. I hope that future generations of graduate students and new faculty members will remember William A. Longacre's enormous contributions to archaeology at Arizona and to the discipline. Okay.
Thank you, Mark. Next, I'd like to invite up James Skibo, who is Distinguished Professor and Chair of Anthropology and Sociology at Illinois State University. Jim?
Thank you, Mike. I am the chair, and I took some time away from feathering my nest for a while. Michael Graves, by the way, has been doing a great job and great service for all of us for the past 3 months, so I'd like to thank him as well. Not only was he there, during the important time for Uncle Willie, but over the past 3 months, he's taken the lead on, I don't know, it's 5 or 6 different obituaries and statements, which includes most recently a more professional piece that is co-authored with Michael and I and Mike Schiffer and Miriam Stark. And it's just been submitted to the Journal of Archaeological Ethno Theory. And since I know the editor, I've got a pretty good feeling about this paper. Yeah, thumbs up on that. In thinking about what I was going to say, I decided to look at some Uncle Willie emails, and he would send me an email sometimes every day, sometimes many times a day. And so I thought, well, this will be a good opportunity to get some wisdom from Uncle Willie himself and some important messages from who I think is one of the most important archaeologists of the 20th century. So here is one of Uncle Willie's last emails to me, and tell me what you think. It simply says, "The past, present, and future walk into a bar. It was tense. That's all it said. I used to that wasn't the last email, so I'm sure you're thinking, what was the last email? Literally hours before he went into the hospital for the last time. This was his email. A group of baboons is called a Congress. It's all clear to me now. So as Mike mentioned, those who knew Uncle Willie knew that he was a pun a minute, and if you got emails from him, I'm sure that you got some of those too. So what I'm going to talk about a little bit is how I first met Bill and what that's meant to me, and something about Longacre luck, something he talked about quite a bit, and of course his generosity and time and treasure. And then I'm going to talk about Ray Nitschke, greatest middle linebacker of all time, and then his mentorship. It sounds like that makes it sound like an awfully long talk. It's not that long. So past, present, and future began in 1982 when I stepped on the campus here. And one of the first people I met was Bill Longacre, who simply said, "I'm a Youper too." Of course, a Youper is a person who comes from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. And our hometowns are actually quite near. our football teams play each other. We're in the same conference. I'm from Crystal Falls, and he's from Houghton. So that connection set the stage for a lifelong friendship and mentorship. The Uper connection was personally important to me because Bill knew what it meant to come from the UP. And if you're a Hunger Games fan, the UP is a beautiful place, but it's also a little bit like District 12. In fact, on September 28, 1883, my great-grandfather was too ill to go to work in the Mansfield mine. That night was the scene of the worst mining disaster in Michigan history. 27 of the 48 miners died. And my grandfather was buried alive in the mine. He was pulled out and lived, but he had a broken pelvis, broken leg, broken ribs. This was what it was like in the UP for Uncle Willie and I. And so he knew what it was meant for somebody like me to even the fact that my DNA even survived is kind of amazing. And the fact that I've come to the University of Arizona, the greatest PhD program in archaeology in the world, is a big deal. And Bill knew it was a big deal, and I always appreciated that. Of course, Uncle Willie and I had many adventures together, particularly in the Philippines. But because of my advice to my friend and other major mentor, Mike Schiffer, I can't talk about any of them because they've all been published. And Mike always said, don't ever say anything or write anything that's not published. So I appreciate that. Because of copyright restrictions, I cannot talk about any of those stories. But luckily, I've got a couple more that I haven't published yet. But I'm open to it if somebody wants to publish some of these. And it's a story that has to do with Longacre luck. And he would oftentimes talk about his luck and the fact that he was at the University of Chicago when Binford appeared, and he just felt like his life was charmed in many ways. And in many ways, I think it was. And Bill, for those of us who were interested in the Kalinga, and for maybe anyone else who would listen, he'd oftentimes talk about his first visit to Dongtalan, the major village in the Philippines where Bill worked for many years. And he would talk about his first meeting when he arrived, and he that night they had a big ceremony in the plaza, started a big fire. All the elders are there, there's singing, there's dancing, and Bill would tell the story about how he explained what he was doing. They had just landed on the moon, so he talked about landing on the moon. It was this great speech, and I was going through some of his files, with permission, I should add, and I came across a transcript of this event, and what was transcribed was what he said, which was fascinating. Because then he also told him it was Halloween. He was going to pass out candy to all the kids. It was sort of very Uncle Willie-like. But he would talk for 2 minutes, and then the Kalinga would talk for 15 or 20 minutes. And then he'd ask a question. He'd talk for 30 seconds. They'd talk for 15 minutes. And he always said to me and everybody else, and because I had a similar experience when I went to the Philippines and worked in the village of Ginaan, a similar kind of experience. So he said, you should expect this, but mine went so well, I'm sure yours will go well. They loved me. Everyone loved me. And so he had an audio recording of it, and I said, well, what if I made a copy of this, and when I go to the Philippines, if I could find somebody who could transcribe it, maybe it would be really interesting, wouldn't it, to see what the Kalinga are saying. While you're sitting there listening for 15 minutes and they're not translating it. Nothing got translated. So he would say something, they'd talk for 20 minutes, they'd ask a simple question in English, and it went like that. So he gives this beautiful speech at the beginning. And then and then there's this 15-minute discussion, and I had it transcribed, and this is what it says. A man stands up and speaks first, and he says, why is it that he's only interested here in Dongtalen? Maybe he has another purpose. He might take us to Arizona and imprison us. Or maybe he will sell Dongtalen. He might get all the potters and make them slaves to make pots for him. We should kill him. One of my greatest moments with Uncle Willie is when I showed him this. Longacre's generosity, many of you know that Longacre was very generous his time and his treasure. And he and I were having lunch at the Union Club. Is the Union Club still there? Probably not, long gone. And my wife at the time was pregnant. This one was my last year here at Arizona. And my baby beeper went off, pre-cell phones. And since that time, he lavished my gifts on my son, Matthew William, and my daughter. And every Christmas, they got this huge box of gifts. It was incredible. He gave them more gifts than we gave our kids gifts, so he was quite generous. And if you were lucky enough to know Uncle Willie at the SAA meetings, it was typical at SAA meetings around mealtime for graduate students to start to hover around Uncle Willie and invite him out to lunch or dinner, because you knew that he would pay, which he did happily. One of my favorite things that we did every year, mostly at the SAA meetings, but sometimes in other contexts, is we'd call a Uper dinner. And we didn't have pasties, although I'm told for one of Beethoven's parties, he did have pasties. And he'd always say, "You pick the spot." And so the first thing I did when I'd come to the SAA meetings is I'd talk to somebody, one of the hotel staff, and I would say, now this is going to sound poorly, but I would say, what is the most expensive restaurant in this city? That sounds bad, but if you know Uncle Willie, you know that, he loved it. I think he did anyway. And so a couple of Upers would go to, our news in New Orleans, or there was even one restaurant where they picked you up in a limousine as part of the package. He loved it. At least I loved it. And we'd have a couple drinks, and at a place like this, there would always be the waiter would start, to come by and say, well, would you like to order? Would you like to order? Kept bugging us about. And finally, Uncle Willie would say, listen, we're going to be here all night, and I'm going to give you the biggest tip you've ever seen in your life. Let's have a little fun. And so that was Uncle Willie, and I'd tell you more, but after my fourth martini, it's a little foggy. But I do remember one thing that he'd end up always saying. And if you're from the UP and your name is William, they called you Billy, so I always called him Billy. And he always called me Jimmy. And he said, look at us, little Jimmy and little Billy from the UP, having dinner in a place like this. Those were special. The next thing is a Ray Nitschke. I have a prop for Ray Nitschke.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
This is the first time I've seen this, but this is Uncle Willie's Fighting Illini letter jacket. Many of you know he was a snare drummer in the Fighting Illini marching band. I don't, he was a different size back then. But one of the stories he'd always tell me, and if you're from the UP, you're also a Green Bay Packer fan, and he wasn't a big football fan until he went to the University of Illinois, and as a snare drummer in the Fighting Illini marching band. And on his same floor was the star Illini football player named Ray Nitschke. Now, many of you may not know who Ray Nitschke is, but I idolize Ray Nitschke. He's voted one of the 50 greatest football players in the 20th century. He's a member of the Hall of Fame. And according to Bill, taught him about the intricacies of football and told him it's like a chess match, and he got him to love football. And since that time, Bill was a fan of Green Bay and, of course, of Ray Nitschke. The last thing I want to talk about, which has also been mentioned already, but is Bill's mentorship. In our world, we can't have enough people on our team. And Bill believed in me, maybe when it wasn't even deserved. And if you were lucky enough to have Bill as a mentor, he believed in you too. And that's a powerful thing. It's a gift that keeps on giving. And I think the best way that I or anybody else can honor him is to, be an Uncle Willie to somebody else. In Bill's teaching and mentorship style, he traced back to Paul Martin, the director of the Vernon Archaeological Project. In a nutshell, that style was to give senior graduate students a lot of rope, a lot of decision in what projects they want to do and how they wanted to do it. Well, two things can happen when you give people that much flexibility, PhD students. It could be chaos and they could come up with real crap. Or it could be very creative, and that's something that chance that Bill was always ready to take with all of us. Although I do my best to pass along this legacy in the most ways, he was so unique that will be totally impossible. So in closing, I would say Billy was my mentor, a friend, and a fellow Uper, and I sure do miss him. Thank you.
So I'm going to read the statement that I received last night from Stephen Acabado, and it relates his experience with Bill coming from the University of the Philippines. I met Tito Bill in 1999. I was on my last year of college at the University of the Philippines and working as a student assistant in the Department of Anthropology. Tito Bill was a visiting professor teaching archaeology courses to a 4-field program without an archaeologist on the faculty. I remember the day I met him. He came into the office, and even though there were several faculty members present that day, he made a point to strike up a conversation with me. He asked me about my interest in anthropology and archaeology. Of course, he asked me why archaeology, with a follow-up that Indiana Jones' answer was not acceptable. I guess he was satisfied with my answer because he recommended me in my graduate school and funding support applications later in that year. I took a couple of classes with Bill at UP. His influence on my scholarship is apparent in my 4-field approach to archaeology. I also credit him for my training in ethnographic approaches, but his influence goes beyond scholarship. To say that he was generous is an understatement. I remember that one of the first things I heard about him before I even met him was that he donated his salary from UP to the department to help with the programs. He helped a lot of students financially, and I am proud and awed to be one of them. He knew me as a poor student, and he helped me pay for my TOEFL and GRE applications. When I was accepted to the graduate program at the University of Hawaii, he paid for my one-way ticket to Honolulu, and he gave me a check that allowed me to survive my first month in Hawaii. Beyond his generosity, Tito Bill was also one of the most kind-hearted individuals I know. As a teacher, he stressed that if you do not have an alternative model, and if you have nothing good to say, then just keep your criticism to yourself. He also emphasized that as much as possible, be nice with your criticisms. He applied this way of thinking not just in the classroom, but also in life. I remember him as a positive and warm-hearted individual who always focused on the good things about people, even to those who were not too nice to him. Tito Bill once said that one of the reasons why he helps students is to see them complete their education. I am only one of many who can say that I finished my degree because of Tito Bill's generosity. When I completed my PhD, Tito Bill told me that I have paid him in full. Still, I hope to repay his generosity by continuing his legacy of exceptional scholarship and humanizing everything that we do. The world has lost a good person. Anthropology lost a champion. He will be missed by many, but most especially by people like me, whose lives he helped change. Miriam Salapo. So I have some words I'd like to share with you about my experiences with Bill. I met Bill Longacre in 1974, May 1974, at the U of A Grasshopper Field School. And from that moment, I was accepted to attend the field school at Grasshopper. My life had become inextricably linked with Longacre's. Of course, I knew of Bill before I met him. He was on the required reading list of my undergraduate theory courses at the University of Washington. But I want to share with you a couple of the events in my life that reflects Bill's impact and significance on my career trajectory. I recall that summer in 1974, the Grasshopper Field School, as if it were yesterday. Meeting Bill Longacre and attending the field school changed my life. It was a summer of numerous lightning flashes set against the incredible scenery of the Ponderosa Pine Forest and the Fort Apache Indian Reservation. Not only was it an incredible experience for me to be doing my first archaeology in the Southwest, I got to finally experience the reality that lay behind the theoretical debates that dominated my undergraduate education. And then something else happened about midway through the summer. One day, passing by, Bill asked me and Julie Stein, she was also a student at Grasshopper that summer, but even more importantly, she was my drinking buddy. He asked us if we wanted some ice for the warm, hot vodka tonics we were drinking on the steps of the student dorm at the field school. He invited us to join him at the director's cabin. Now everyone knew about Bill's cabin. It had a gas refrigerator that made ice, and it was the only ice available outside of the kitchen. So Julie and I took him up on the invitation. We knew this was a great and unusual honor for students in the field school, and we were even more amazed that we became regulars on his porch. At some point during one of the conversations on those afternoon cocktail hours, Longacre asked me, why would you attend graduate school at the same university where you were an undergraduate? I said bluntly, UW accepted me. He then inquired, are you interested in attending U of A? I said, sure, but I wasn't admitted when I applied to your department the first time around. What's going to change now? He said, and really, I can take care of that. Julie looked at me and she said something to the effect of, holy shit. And Bill, to his ever-loving credit, did just what he said he would. Before I left the field school to return to Seattle, I had been admitted to the anthropology doctoral program at U of A for the fall semester 1974. And Bill also found funding for me as well to support my graduate education. Such was the influence of Bill on my life. Through his efforts, my emergent professional trajectory had just changed. 7 years at U of A were followed by my graduation in 1981, and here the story picks up again. So I just completed my dissertation, and I was afforded that reality check most of us had avoided throughout graduate school. I needed a job, and there were no jobs to be had. It was a bad year economically, though all such years are bad for those searching for professional employment and coming up empty-handed. That wasn't quite my outcome, for eventually a position was offered to me as an assistant professor of anthropology at the University of Guam in the far western Pacific, where I'd never been, never worked, never thought I would ever live. I'd never even traveled outside of the continental United States. I thought of myself as part of the UA anthropology family. And this was one time that Bill was very firm with me. He said, "You need to take this position at the University of Guam. You cannot expect to stay here if you want to grow professionally. This is an opportunity for you to make something of yourself, no matter where it might be located." And so I took the position. From my perspective today, it was absolutely the best professional decision I ever was forced to make. There are, however, about 2 years of typed letters that Bill kept of mine that are now in the ASM archives that detail my initial experiences and reflection and reaction to life on Guam. But you can go look in the archives for those. It did take me a couple of years to make peace with myself. I thought I had failed in archaeology, but also with Longacre, since I thought he personally had sent me there into exile. So over the next few years, I re-engineered myself as a Pacific Island archaeologist, learned what it meant to be a professional colleague and faculty mentor. And I have Longacre to thank for this learning experience, one I didn't want, but without which I would never have succeeded in archaeology or found my way to the other academic positions I have held. To make this long story short, in 1986, after several years of unsuccessful applications for positions elsewhere, I was hired at the University of Hawaii. I'd been applying for a number of faculty positions in the US mainland after I arrived in Guam. By 1985, I had been appointed as the director of the Micronesian Area Research Center and had come to terms with the prospect of spending the rest of my career at UOG. However, in the academic year 1984-85, Bill spent that year on sabbatical leave from U of A at the University of Hawaii. The following fall, after he spent his year there, a new position was advertised at UH for a Pacific archaeologist, which I had by then become. I applied and I interviewed for the position, and in April 1986 was offered the job, an advancement to a research university that I had craved. I arrived in early August to take up my new position in Honolulu, just a little more than a year after Bill was there on a sabbatical year. I don't think these events are coincidental. Longacre was always coy about exactly what he had done that year, except to say he told everyone in the department they needed to hire another Pacific Island archaeologist. And his views on this were recorded such high regard that the UH Anthropology Department and administration opened up a position and undertook the recruitment. I don't imagine that I got the job just because of Bill, but I got the job because of Bill. At both UOG and UH, I learned what it was like to teach and mentor students. That challenging them to learn and to succeed required both rigor and empathy. Like Longacre, I worked in the field with students. Because of my experience at Grasshopper with Bill and Jeff Reed, I knew how to develop and implement field training programs. In recruiting students to work with, I recalled my own experience at Grasshopper. Hence, I looked at individuals' potential in addition to their academic records to assess the complete person. And I always tried to provide an honest assessment of my students' progress. Longacre's role in my professional development and what I learned from him even when I wish my own academic life might have gone just a bit differently, it remains my touchstone for mentoring every new generation of Longacre students. I spent 20 years teaching at UH before I was offered the position of chair of anthropology at UNM. The position was offered to me, and after I arrived in 2007, I sought Bill's guidance once again, since he had been head of the Department of Anthropology here at U of A before I had arrived at UNM, and UNM was known to be even a tougher nut to crack. I ultimately learned most of my professional manners from Bill Longacre, and here are a few of them. Don't take things personally, and don't blame others. Laugh at your own plight, so you don't despair. Work for the collective good with common goals, and not only for yourself. Learn to take criticism, because it comes with the territory. Be patient with students, where they usually don't know any better. And be generous with your ideas and research, just as Longacre has been with me and all of his students. I've learned, and I think Bill knew this well in advance of me, that the most direct or visible trajectory for one's profession and life is not necessarily the only or the best one for each of us. We need only to be open to new experiences. Based on his own background, he knew that good things can happen unexpectedly or arise out of disappointment, particularly if you look ahead rather than behind or in the past. I learned from Bill to be optimistic about life, to pursue my dreams, and to help others realize theirs. Thank you, Bill. And I'd like to call Raymond H. Thompson up to speak to us.
These personal confessions that you have heard relieve me from saying anything. I will, however, go back to how Bill got to Arizona, because that was one of his favorite stories. Can you all hear me? When I agreed to become head of the department and director of the museum, it was necessary for us to hire a new Southwestern archaeologist because I could no longer carry the same teaching load with the administrative duties. And Dr. Howery and I had some discussions about what kind of a person we wanted to have. And those discussions were governed by some things that were going on in American archaeology at the time. And to be very blunt about it, what was going on is that the Donald Trump of American archaeology was very active in American archaeology at that time. We had Louis Binford. And Emil and I were very much concerned that we needed somehow to bring to our students the good things that Lou Binford had to say, and he did have a lot of good things to say. But we also wanted to avoid the problem that Lou Binford required disciples, not students. And we didn't think having disciples as graduate students was a good form of graduate education. And so we stumbled around for a while, and then we realized that both of us had got to know this skinny guy called Bill Longacre, who had been, we visited with Paul Martin's excavations a good many times, and we had met Bill under these circumstances. And the interesting thing is, we didn't know Bill very well. We knew that he had extensive field experience. We knew that he was a pleasant young man. And one afternoon we decided, let's hire him. You know, we didn't go interview him. We didn't look into his background any further. we said that this is the kind of guy who will enable us to bring Lou Binford's ideas to our students and to be open to other people's ideas for our students. And so Emil called up the Longacre home, and Bill answered the telephone. This was right after he had earned his PhD at Chicago. And Bill answered the telephone, and Dr. Howery said, "I'd like to speak to Dr. Longacre." And Bill said, "Which Dr. Longacre, the physicist or the anthropologist?" And Emil said, "The anthropologist." And Bill said, "Well, this is he." And Emil said, and this is their time of conversation, "I want to offer you an assistant professorship at the University of Arizona." And Bill, after he recovered, said yes. Now, if you want to talk about the old boy network, there's a good example. That was the most important decision that Emil Howery and I ever made together. And that is what helped to make Arizona the place to study archaeology. Because we brought to our faculty an individual who understood what all the new ideas floating around in the discipline were, had ideas of his own, wanted to share them with everyone, and on top of all of it, he was a nice guy. And I think everything you heard here today documents that and demonstrates that if we ever did anything good, the best thing we did was to hire Bill Longacre.
Thank you, Ray. I do have a statement I edited down from Miriam Stark to present today. To give her an opportunity, since she can't be with us today, to offer her perspectives on Bill. She says, "Here I offer a few personal memories of Bill as I knew him as a teacher, primarily during our time in the Philippines. Archaeologists celebrate fieldwork which cement bonds, also tests friendships, and in the worst situation, forges long-term enmities. Few students, however, have the opportunity to spend an entire academic year in the field with advisors, as we did during the 1987-1988 Kalinga Ethnoarchaeological Project. We celebrated life passages like his 50th birthday in the field. Thank you, Gloria Fenner, for sending the party food. We toasted you. As well as community births, weddings, and deaths, as well as the passing of Bill's mother during that year as well. So drawing from this reservoir of intense emotional experience that was the 1987-88 project, I want to offer a few new insights about who the man Bill Longacre was. There was, first of all, his generosity that went unspoken. Tito Bill provided basic medical services to the Kalinga villages in the Paseo River Valley where project members worked. Basic medical assistance was several hours away by foot and dirt road, and Kalingas, technically considered indigent, had access to only the most basic of services. Before we left for the field, Bill asked us to decide whether and how much medical help we were prepared to offer villagers. He would buy the medicine. I worked in Dalupa with Nita Tubalot. We offered medical care each morning before breakfast at 6 a.m. to our host families on our host family's porch. My favorite story centers on the Dalupa deworming project. After some hesitation at the scale and nature of my request, Bill purchased and I, Miriam, distributed enough deworming medicine for every mother in every Dalupa household to rid her child of intestinal worms. Bill had provided more than 250 doses of deworming medicine, and the Dalupa mothers were absolutely thrilled with the results. There was also the fact that Bill led by example in the Kalinga Ethnoarchaeological Project. His strategy for teaching participant observation was to actually do it. Our training began during the 6 weeks we spent waiting in Manila as we prepared to move off to the downtown area. Bill patiently shuttled us back and forth to the visa office and our trips each day. He modeled restraint and good humor during exchanges and interchanges, both with faculty and students at the University of the Philippines, some who were concerned about his presence on the UP campus. Bill's sense of humor in the Philippines helped us all to retain a sense of proportion. So much of our time and innumerable hours were spent traveling or waiting. Reaching our field sites from Manila took a day's travel, 14 hours by bus, 6 hours by 2 trucks, and then another 30-minute hike to reach our respective villages. We students got progressively more agitated with each leg of such a trip. Bill, in contrast, snoozed, chatted idly with us, teased, or told endless stream of bad jokes. For hours he did this. And of course, puns were his favorite. The bigger the groan, the better. Very little seemed to bother Bill about field work, including the endless waiting that dogged us at every step of the way. For visas in Manila, the monsoon rains to stop when we first arrived, or during the day-long collective events where Kalingas celebrated or commemorated people. Days could be long without amenities that electricity and running water provide, and life was uncomfortable. Several project members, including myself, Miriam notes, chafed at the tedium, while Bill's beatific smile reflected what seemed like limitless patience throughout nearly everything. Bill was also an engaged anthropologist before the term became into vogue. Doing collaborative research and consultation were intrinsic to his Kalinga fieldwork. Bill gave back to the communities where project members worked or through hiring employees. Beyond the medicinal purchases, Bill paid for Dontalan villagers to stabilize their local spring with cement, which all used for washing and drinking water. Tito Bill supported several Pasil Kalingas college students for their bachelor's degree, and at least one Pasil Kalinga student through law school. He also practiced democratic governance with the Kalinga Ethnoarchaeological Project team members. All of them were students. Miriam writes, I chose the University of Arizona's anthropology program for graduate school because it was the only place in the country where I could study archaeology of the North American Southwest and East and Southeast Asia, 2 geographic regions that gripped me since I was 19 years old. I chose William Longacre because I was told he would be an ideal advisor, given his track record and easy manner. What is harder to understand is why he chose any of us students to mentor through our graduate careers. Perhaps I overestimated his hands-off approach and underestimated his commitment to us. He attended my PhD graduation and hooded me. He met my family. He asked about them for years afterward. Our relationship continued and deepened through the years after Kalinga. Sometimes we crossed paths at conferences. I feel privileged to have known Uncle Willie almost all of my adult life, to have worked through tragedies together, to have celebrated so many events through the years. Uncle Willie loved his scotch and he loved a good party. And just one example, Bill concocted and designed the anthropology program's Diamond Jubilee in 1990 with all of its events with sheer pleasure. Many here doubtless also attended at least one of Beethoven's birthday parties that Bill hosted on each year in December. He enjoyed people even more than he loved Beethoven, and he enjoyed a good party perhaps as much as he loved a football game. Bill's spirit lives on through our celebration of his life, of our connectedness, and of this beautiful world in which we live. Remember Bill Longacre with warmth and humor, and pass it along to the next generation. And let us all say thank you to Tito Bill. At this point in the program, if there's anyone who would like to come down and say anything, I welcome you. The mic now becomes open and yours if you have something you would like to say.
Actually, I would. If I could beg your attention a few minutes longer. I have something that has occurred to me in part while I'm sitting here in a conscious kind of way that I'd like to reinforce with you, and that's the concept of generosity, the link between William Longacre and generosity. I knew Bill Longacre for 50 years, and since I just turned 60, you can do the math, right? Bill Longacre is a very important part of my family. It is fair to say that we loved each other. It is absolutely a fact that I would not be here at the University of Arizona had I not followed my father in accepting a faculty position here that was somehow created by Dr. Thompson at the behest of Bill Longacre. So there is a hugely interconnected relationship between me and Dr. Longacre. So it did not actually come as a surprise to me in the fall of 1999, during my first year as department head, that Bill Longacre made a formal appointment to see me through Barbara Fragoso and came into my office and asked me if I'd be the executor of his estate. I said yes immediately, even though I didn't quite know what that meant. And he was apparently so confident of my answer that he had a copy of his will there with him to be filed away for some future reference, which I did until last November. Colleagues and friends of mine who have been executors of other people's estates have said the worst part is finding out all the stuff that you don't actually want to know about that person. And so I went into this process with a fair amount of fear and loathing, to be honest with you. And now Bill's home here in Tucson closes escrow next Tuesday. As some of the final details are coming to a close, on the one hand, I have to tell you that, in fact, I have learned absolutely nothing about Bill Longacre that I didn't already know, that you already know. And the one thing that I should have known in more detail is the one that I want to reinforce with you, and that is the aspect of his generosity. You know, one of the not particularly pleasant things I've had to do is to sit down with Bill's accountant and file his 2015 income taxes. Bill Longacre, for whatever reason, was audited virtually every year of his entire adult life by the IRS, to the point where decades ago I would have filed a lawsuit for some kind of discrimination. It's ridiculous. So I went into this process with a fair amount of fear. Bill was an extraordinarily good record keeper, and so there were filing cabinets full of information, and I went through all of this stuff. Much to my horror, realized that I believe Bill's post-retirement occupation was giving away money. You know, I don't know about you, but at least 2 or 3 times a week when I pick up the mail, there is a thick envelope in there from somebody sending me pre-printed return address labels if I will please send them a couple of bucks. And like most of you, I send them a couple of bucks out of guilt, which only reinforces the problem. And I mean, it's this horrible thing, right? I discovered a closet full of pre-printed return address labels. Whereas you and I, out of guilt, frankly, no more than that, would send the Fund for Saving Kittens $2, right? Cover the cost of their, postage, for heaven's sakes. We're talking kittens here. Bill Longacre would send a check for $200 or $300. I amassed no fewer than 100 canceled checks for such donations during calendar year 2015. Everything from saving Civil War battlefields to, I am a personal friend of Hillary Clinton, as far as I can tell. I mean, at least, I now, as the executive of the state, get personal letters written from Hillary. So or the Hillary machine, I expect. So, yeah, great archaeologist, super guy to be around, unbelievable mentor, absolutely. But, I think for the rest of my days, the thing that impresses me the most about that man is the G word, generosity, of time and treasure. That is an excellent phrase, and it is so true of William Longacre. Anyone else like to say something? Dr. Mark Nichter.
Hi, I wasn't planning on saying anything, but I've been listening, and generosity, kindness, compassion, yes, you've been hearing all about that. I wanted to talk about another part of Bill, which was immense curiosity. So I'm not an archaeologist. I'm a medical anthropologist, which is not all that close to archaeology sometimes. And I ended up working in the Philippines for several years, and I used to go by and visit Bill and Makati when I was there. I worked mostly in the south. I didn't work in northern Philippines. But I'd kind of hang out with him for a couple of days. And for those of you who remember, Mimi and I used to hold a Halloween party at our house every year. It was this big event. We got everyone together. We just had fun and dressed up, became another persona. I still have photographs of some of you, by the way. And I was out in the Philippines on a Fulbright, and it was Halloween, 2 days before Halloween, and I kind of felt odd, because every year we had this party, right? And Bill was in the Philippines at the time. He was the only other person from the department. So I figured I'd go by and see him. I went by and saw him 2 days before Halloween. And we were sitting there talking. He said, well, what are your plans? I said, what do you mean? He said, well, sounds to me like you want to do something. And I figured we'd end up in a bar or something like that. And he said to me, I said to him rather, well, what I'd really like to do is I'd like to visit the oldest graveyard in the Philippines to see what people do during this time. And he immediately said, oh, it's Vigan. He said, I've always wanted to go to see what happens there. And I said, okay, I'll do it. So it's a long trip, overnight bus and all the things that you can imagine. And I went to Vigan, and he was kind of delighted. He said, yeah, stop by and see me after you've been there. I'd like to know what you observe. So I got there and I didn't really know what to do. So I watched everybody, and everyone cleans graves, and they kind of get paint, and they kind of paint the names of people and everything. So I just chose a grave that was really, no one had attended in years. And I went into town and I bought all the necessary things, and I did the exact ritual that everybody else was doing. There was food, and people watched me for a long time. This is an Ilocano-speaking area, and I work in Visayan and Tagalog-speaking areas, and they finally came up to me and they said, is this one of your relatives? Do you have a Filipino wife? Is it a relative? And I said, maybe. I said, at some point, we may all be related. And they said, you don't have a Filipino wife? How did you choose this grave? I said, well, the grave looked like it needed attending to. So a crowd gathered, and they all talked about this. They decided that this was a very good thing that I was doing, a mitzvah, I suppose. And that was it. Next day, I got back in the all-night bus. I went back to the Philippines, went back to see Uncle Willie. I told him the story. He loved the story. He was laughing. He said yes. And then he kind of looked at me and he said, what did you eat? And I said, excuse me? He said, what did you eat? I know you have this odd diet. You don't eat meat. Did you eat anything there? And I said, well, he said, because eating is a big part of this. And I said, yes, it was really difficult. Everyone was eating aso and all kinds of things that I don't eat. And when people found out that there was nothing that I could eat there at the graveyard, everyone had all this food, what happened is that a couple of the women got together and actually went into town, got food, and cooked it for me, and gave it to me. Now, this had not been part of my story, but this was the kind of detail that, he talked to me for about an hour and a half, and he said to me, That's the generosity of the Philippines. You were doing something that was kind, and kindness was given to you. A debt of gratitude, perhaps, I don't know. And at that point, our relationship changed. Now, I used to get these hand-scribbled notes in my mailbox about the complexity of the Philippines. Got very interested in medical anthropology, what I was doing there. But it changed the relationship. And every single note I got was a question that was almost impossible to answer simply. It meant that I'd have to go and see him and talk to him about it for a while. And he would always nod and said, yes, it's a complex place to work. That's it. Anyway, I remember him for his curiosity and his generosity, but again, I was never one of his students. I didn't get a free lunch from him. I just got the curiosity part, and that was great.
Anyone else? For those of you who are shy, we have another opportunity to capture your thoughts about Dr. Longacre, which allows me to segue into the last phase of this morning's gathering, which is to reintroduce Dr. Dana Osborne to you. Dana is one of the recent PhDs in linguistic anthropology. She worked in Ilocos Sur. She is a specialist in Ilocano. And for that reason, I think, formed a bond with Bill Longacre. And as part of the anthropology centennial year in 2015, she took it upon herself to conduct an extensive interview with Bill, generating, I don't know, hours, I guess, of video discussing his work, which she is now in the process of putting together in a condensed form of about an hour. We have a 2 or 3 minute trailer that we'd like to share with you now. But the other relevant portion of this is that Dana has set up in the mirror image of this room, room 103 across the hall, a sort of StoryCorps-like place where you can go and sit for a few minutes and say whatever you'd like to about Bill Longacre and be incorporated eventually in this ongoing thing that we're calling the documentary on Bill Longacre. Dana, do you want to say anything else about your work in this film?
Thanks, John. So the documentary piece that we're working on now, it's sort of a living document that we actually have incorporated some scholars into that knew Bill, including John, Ray, and Casey and Chris. So we do have extensive interviews from all of these fantastic scholars who actually knew Bill personally. One of the things that came out of the interview in 2015, Diane Austin was actually there with us, and she conducted the interview because you had the greatest sort of social memory at the time, institutional memory with Bill. And I've been kind of scrubbing through this 4-hour document. Typically when we conduct an interview, it's only about an hour. But with Bill, we actually had about a 4-hour recording session, and Bill was just an incredible host. He was funny. He spoke to me in Ilocano. The first thing that he actually found out about my research interest before I came to know him personally, and he addressed me in Ilocano. "Naimbang bigat mo. Good morning. How are you?" I was, oh wow, Bill, that's amazing. So I only knew Bill for a little while before he passed, but just the short amount of time that I got to know him, and in speaking to all of you guys, I've really come to appreciate sort of what an amazing person he was, and how profoundly he impacted the field. And not only the field, but also the people within the field and the people surrounding the field. So I have this piece here that I want to share with you guys. It's about 3 minutes long. It's basically just a little snippet of the larger piece, which is about 55 minutes long. I'm sort of finishing up the final details there, and it will be available on the Arizona Anthropology YouTube page, which you can access after May 18th. So it'll be up, ready for you to share, to watch directly or share with your colleagues. or friends. So I'm just going to play a little bit of this, and just to remind you, for those of you who are feeling a little shy, who would like to share a story, even if it's a couple of minutes, just a memory of Bill, we do have a small little setup in 103s, just hello, my name is, I remember this, or whatever you would like to share. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look. I wonder if we'd like to change the lights somehow.
I can do that right here.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. So let me start this up. Oh, actually, I do have it here. All right. So I actually discovered that Bill is actually Longacre the third. So, no? Is that incorrect? Okay,
Second.
so I do need to change that. That was on a different website. All right.
For Willie, I don't think there was a division. His life is always open to other people, intellectually and personally. And so, like I said, he would host. He loved the holidays. He loved Thanksgiving. He loved to cook big meals.
One of the key factors for Bill Longacre was he had great respect for his fellow human beings. He was gracious, courteous. He wanted to help. He wanted to listen to what you had to say. That's what we wanted for a graduate professor in archaeology.
I guess my earliest memories of Bill are just of a really pleasant, outgoing, funny guy wearing plaid shirts. I don't know why I always associate Bill Longacre with short-sleeve plaid shirts, but I do.
And in addition to those personal qualities, he brought with him a full understanding of what Binford had to say, an ability to decide what was the best of Binford's ideas and what was garbage, and the willing to sit down and talk to students about it. Well, what more could you ask in a good graduate program?
And so I remember just walking around Grasshopper with he and my dad, looking at the site and listening to them talk about it. And, in part, I think that's what reinforced the archaeology bug in me professionally as well.
And Super Bowl.
And I did the Super Bowl. That was almost a holiday. Green Bay was his team. He once gave an entire lecture in the history of archaeological theory wearing a cheese slice. He came to class and wore his Vikings helmet. So you had a student in class wearing this Viking helmet, and Bill up front lecturing on God only knows what an archaeological theory, wearing this cheese slice on his head, being very distinguished and not laughing ever. It was hilarious. But so he loved to cook big meals on his respective holidays, and he would always say the orphans are always welcome, and that was any student, anybody who didn't have a place to go.
And we'll let you start by just telling your name, and then start off with the first story you'd like to tell us.
My name is William A. Longacre. Many of my students call me Uncle Willie. That's a story later.
Everybody. So again, that can be found on the School of Anthropology's YouTube page. And Uncle Willie tells some of his favorite stories, a lot from Grasshopper, a lot. So please take the time to check it out. We also will be circulating the links somehow, maybe over the listserv, Diane. I'll go ahead and give this back to John.
Mike, do you have any final comments you want to make? If not, please join us in the foyer. The refreshments are still out there, and enjoy spending time with one another. Thank you again all for coming. We really appreciate it.